If this conversation hits home for you, the best way to support the show is to follow, share, and leave a quick review. I really appreciate you guys so much. On to the episode.
3 out of 10 times in baseball, and you do that long enough, you're a very well-remembered baseball player.
Welcome to another incredible episode of Purpose-Driven Progress. As always, I am your host, Jacob Hicks. And today, you guys, man, we've really got a fun one. We're going to be kind of diving into the deep end a little bit, I'm not going to lie. Because today we've got Jimmy Bosco. He's a former pro baseball player turned scientist, entrepreneur, and advisor. From the Orioles and the Cardinals to cutting-edge biotech labs, Jimmy brings a rare blend of grit, curiosity, and bold experimentation to everything he does. Jimmy, my friend, welcome to the show, man. So glad to have you.
Thanks, Jacob. Glad to be here.
Well, let's kind of start at the top of the thing here. So, I mean, gosh, there's a ton to unpack there because you're a pro baseball player and now you are like huge in the biotech world. So, I mean, how does that kind of all mesh together? How did you get to where you are?
Yeah, so I started by getting drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals. And in college, I had a rather circuitous route because of a lot of complications. I originally started at UC Berkeley, Cal, for baseball on a scholarship. And I moved to the University of Arkansas in the SEC for baseball in 2010 because of budget cuts in California. They talking about dropping the baseball program, and rumors were flying around. So we decided that we're gonna move out there, and ultimately that was because I was focused intently on baseball, and I had some success. Arkansas had come to town, and when Arkansas had come to town and we played against them, I had some success on a Friday night against their best pitcher. And ultimately, that was something that really allowed them to say yes to me coming and playing with them. And it was a great time in Arkansas. Played in the College World Series in 2012. We finished third in the nation that year. And then ultimately, it was starting to become clear that when we were there, meaning me, my family was a big part of that too. So I feel like we, they thought that it was clear that these guys were not going to let me play every single day in a way that would enable me to be able to go professional in baseball like I knew I could.
Okay.
Came back to Menlo College for one semester in 2013 spring after being in Arkansas. And Menlo is a small college right next to Stanford and Palo Alto area. And I was drafted out of there. And, you go play professional baseball, it's going to be a mix of a lot of different things. And I had a lot of success in my career. And ultimately, it wasn't up to me in many cases where the decisions were going to be made for my career itself.
Right.
My first year, I had a lot of success. Had a lot of success every year. But I wanted to switch gears and go back to school. And because I had this journeyman long circuitous route across college at that point, I decided, we can go back to Berkeley and I can get my degree. And at that point, I was a father. And, my wife and I were thinking about moving back to the Bay Area for me to do that. And when I got back there, I had some of the biggest breaks of my life because of baseball, having met some incredible scientists and folks that were just very, very top tier scientists. And ultimately it was the background in baseball that enabled them to really be excited about me being in the lab.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were telling me the story, right? Well, do you mind sharing that conversation that you guys kind of had? I mean, when you were doing some of those, those lab interviews. That's a fun story.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny to think about all the way that it went down. I first scientist I ever spoke to when I got back to Berkeley was Jennifer Doudna. Jennifer won the Nobel Prize in 2020 for CRISPR-Cas9 technology. Her lab was ultimately full, and so I reached out to several other laboratories that I was interested in working with. And at that point, I was more interested in doing medical school because my father's a trauma surgeon, my mom's a nurse. And so it was familiar. And when I reached out to several of these folks, I got some favorable responses back because I was very honest. And, if I could say anything to anyone out there who's a scientist, who's wanting to be an aspiring scientist, I would say that, you ultimately want to be honest about what you know and what you don't know, because I said, I don't know anything, guys. I don't know anything at that point, but what I do know is how to be in close proximity to people for a very long period of time in a row consecutively because of baseball. I knew how to be a team player. I knew that you needed to make adjustments consistently because things fail. Baseball's got a high failure rate. And that drew the attention of Robert Tijan. And so I got my I got my big break when I met with Tej in his office. I walked in and, you know, Tej's office is an impressive place. And I had no idea who he was at the time. And, you know, there's a picture of the president in the office with him, next to him on the side of the table where I was looking. And there's the Golden Gate and the whole view of the San Francisco Bay Area. You know, it was like Iron Man's office, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
who is this guy? And, he said, after about 2 minutes of small talk, here's the deal. You're going to come in my lab and you're not going to know what the hell's going on. And then some time is going to pass and you're still not going to know what the hell's going on. And then you'll take some classes and you'll be 5 more minutes into our lab meetings before you're completely lost. But none of that's why I'm bringing you into my lab. I'm bringing you into my lab because you were the 1% in baseball. And that's a universal trait in your life. And now we're going to do it again with science. And I was hooked.
I love that. That's so much fun. Before we get into like all the cool, I mean, like you already mentioned CRISPR and some of these other things. Well, I guess first, before, like for anybody who may not know, can you just explain briefly like who Robert Tej is?
Sure. Yeah, Robert Tej discovered, in many cases, most of our textbooks, transcription and how genes turn on in our cells. He's credited with the first discovery of a transcription factor of all time during his postdoc training with James Watson. He calls him Jim. So James Watson is kind of my proverbial academic grandfather, if you will. So James Watson discovered DNA and the structure of DNA with Francis Crick. And then Robert Tej discovered the first transcription factor of any sort in his lab when he was studying there as a postdoc. And then he came back to Berkeley and became a professor at Berkeley in about 1978, 1979. I think it was 1979. And he quickly became a face that was a force to be reckoned with back on the West Coast, having become a original scientific advisor for Genentech. And he's a serial entrepreneur himself now, founding Tularic with one of his good friends, David Goodell. And they ultimately sold that company in, I think, 2004 to Amgen for $1.3 billion. And he's now a part of many other biotech ventures. He's a director, or has been a director to the Column Group. And I think he won California Scientist of the Year at one point. And just a good man in the lab, good human being. You would never know, having talked to Tej, what, you know, everyone calls him Tej, what his background is, but he's incredibly formidable in the lab, an intense scientist, and only intense because he wants the rigor that brings the ethical, wonderful results that people need that will eventually lead to you to the clinic and to your bedside. And so his intensity matched my intensity, and I think he drew from that immediately. And that's really where him and I hit it off at the end. But I only discovered all that after I was done interviewing. Holy cow.
Yep,
right?
and did a quick Google search.
Right. After, I was like, who was that guy? And I was like, wow. And that was that for me, right? You know?
Well, so again, before we dive into, like, say, CRISPR, because I mean, you know, we talked about CRISPR quite a bit already, like offline, but I really want to I want to understand better, because I mean, say you really are like the 1% of 1%, right? Like most people do not make it to professional level of any kind of sport, right? So I'm really curious, like, what do you feel like is similar from like your mentality when you were, you know, playing ball to, you know, what you're doing now in biotech?
It's a great question, Jacob. I think, you know, and I've thought about this a lot. And if you humor me here, this is the best part. So
Yeah.
in baseball, you know, in professional baseball especially, you're going to have a lot of things that are very similar in your routine every day. So, you know, you're going to play every day, 140 games, not including spring training. Every single day you're doing something similar. And so it's like Groundhog's Day, except for you're going to be in a different town. So you're going to wake up, you're going to have breakfast, and then right around 10, 11 o'clock, usually, you're going to get to the field, and you're going to have lunch, and you're going to do everything the same. And then you're going to do your stretching, your lifting, your warm-up, your batting practice, your routine before the game. You're going to put your jersey on the same every single day. And then the novelty is the game that night. And all the preparation that you've been doing, all the things that you've been focused on for the whole day, they all come to a culmination in that night to see on a nightly basis, you get this positive, you know, output, or negative, if you will, sometimes, on how you've prepared. And ultimately, I see this a lot like what you do in a laboratory, where you're going to be doing a lot of the same things over and over again. And the more consistently you can do those things in your routine, and the better you can make adjustments in experiments that might fail, say striking out as an example, then the better you're going to have, you know, the ability to be turning around and making an adjustment to be contributing to your team, which is your laboratory's ultimate goal, which is to find the answers to questions that you're all collectively interested in. And so in the case of baseball, you're interested in winning, right?
Right.
And so you want to be able to contribute to that. And it is up to you to be able to learn from, what was successful, learn from what was a failure, and then take that novelty from the night before and quickly translate that back into an adjustment or to a concerted effort to keep doing the same thing, And so it's kind of like, don't talk yourself out of success, and also don't be afraid to face the failure of a hypothesis that fails, and recognize that ultimately it's all about being receptive to the science and taking the subjectivity out of it. It's like, if I objectively was swinging poorly because something biomechanical, I wanted to know about it. My experiment fails, or if something happens, it's not because it's not because it fails because I did the wrong prep work or whatever. I want to make sure I get a negative result. That's a true negative result. It's the same thing. And so being able to handle lots of failure, being able to focus your effort towards something that's collectively going to keep pushing towards the answer. These things ended up becoming very, very similar. And, you got to have a little bit of a loose screw in baseball to keep going up there. And, you see